Welcome to the program, everyone. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos, East African Communities Facilitator on the peace process in the eastern region of the Democratic Republic of Congo. Uhuru Kenyatta is in the DRC for talks set to take place on the 21st of this month. The former president of Kenya arrived on Sunday to assess the security situation and is meeting people in the regional capital, Goma, who have fled the fighting between government troops and M23 rebels. Fighting continued near the strategic city of Goma in North Kivu province. Regional efforts are underway to cool tensions between the two countries and end the conflict unfolding along their shared border. Angolan president visited both nations over the weekend after mediating talks between Congolese and Rwandan officials in Luanda earlier this month. The chair of West Africa's main regional bloc, ECOWAS, Umaro Sissoco Embalo, also traveled to Kinshasa and Kigali. Kenya is sending a second batch of soldiers on Wednesday. Uganda and South Sudan are also planning to send troops there. And the British government has announced the early withdrawal of its military contingent currently deployed in Mali's parts of the UN mission to the country. According to the Ministry of Defense, the commitment was supposed to last 3 years, but faced with the rising instability in the country, London decided to anticipate the withdrawal of its troops, who should leave the country in the next 6 months. Côte d'Ivoire also has notified the UN that it will withdraw its military and police contingent from the international peacekeeping force in Mali. It said the withdrawal would be gradual and will take effect by August 2023. The two countries have been at loggerheads after Mali detained almost 50 Ivorian soldiers in July, accusing them of being mercenaries. Several other countries have also withdrawn their forces from Mali following 2 military coups and the junta's growing ties with the Russian mercenary force.
We're aware of the statement by the Minister of Armed Forces to the House of Commons, and we will engage with the permanent mission in relation to this announcement, that is to say the UK permanent mission. We remain grateful to the United Kingdom for its contribution to MINUSMA and its continued support to UN peace operations.
And the UN Security Council will be extending for another year the UN peacekeeping mission in the Central African Republic. This comes after a vote on Monday which saw 12 countries in favor, with 3 abstentions, namely Russia, China and Gabon. The French drafted resolution maintains the robust mandate of the 17,500 peacekeeping mission, focusing on protecting civilians whilst encouraging President Faustin Touadéra and his government to promote lasting peace and stability through a reinvigorated political and peace process. Intercommunal fighting has raged in the mineral-rich but impoverished Central African Republic since 2013. The resolution adopted urges all parties to respect the ceasefire and urgently implement a reconciliation process. A Zambian student who was serving a prison sentence in Russia has been killed on the front line in Ukraine in unclear circumstances. According to the Zambian Foreign Ministry, 23-year-old Lemekani Nyirenda was pursuing nuclear engineering at the Moscow Engineering Physics Institute, but in 2020, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison for an unspecified offense. The ministry adds that the government-sponsored student was killed in September, but the Russian authorities had just notified the Zambian government of the death. Zambia is now requesting from the Russian authorities information on the circumstances that led to his recruitment to fight in Ukraine and subsequently lose his life. The Zambian embassy in Russia had further established that Mr. Nyirenda's body has since been transported to the Russian southern border town of Rostov in readiness for repatriation to Zambia. The circumstances of Nyirenda's release from prison are unknown, but Russia has offered freedom to some prisoners in exchange for fighting in its war in Ukraine. The governor of Kenya's Garissa County has ordered the removal of more than 3,000 false names on the payroll. Local media reports that the names were discovered following a human resource audit that also found that most directors and their deputies were hired to head departments without having mandatory university degrees. And about 100 drivers were employed, yet the county has only 12 vehicles in its transport department. Governor Natif Jama says a task force had been appointed where those complaining of unfair dismissal can present their case. Well, hundreds of young volunteers have responded to DR Congo's President Felix Tshisekedi's call to join the front line and fight against the M23 rebels. The mobilization comes as fighting intensifies between the government soldiers and the rebels in the eastern region. The volunteers were pictured on Monday sitting on a plane bound for a training center. The volunteers had marched through the roads of Goma before heading to the airport. Morale is also said to be high amongst the volunteers who have stepped up to join the offensive against the rebels. Much of the recruitment took place across the North Kivu province. It's unclear how long the training will take before the volunteers are deployed to the front lines. And people continue to flee the fighting in the Democratic Republic of Congo between the army and M23 rebels, continuing with the story in that region. According to an army spokesperson, fighting has moved close to the key eastern city of Goma, causing a fresh wave of displacement amid diplomatic efforts to resolve the conflict.
Hundreds of people have fled to the village of Kibati, around 15 kilometers away from Goma, in recent days, trying to escape the fighting between the DRC army and M23 rebels. Kibati has set up 3 camps for internally displaced people over the past month. Some have taken refuge in houses already abandoned by residents moving further south.
We didn't see the M23, but the message that came in was that the M23 attacked us. So it was this movement that made us flee.
Insecurity has prevented humanitarian assistance. One woman, Odete Inyereri, says she had given abandoned tents made from tarpaulins stretched over wooden frames to people fleeing the latest wave of fighting.
Displaced people who were here before built these huts, but when they heard the gunfire from the clashes on Saturday, they all dismantled some of the tarpaulins and plastic bags on the huts and fled to Goma. That's how the newly displaced people got these shelters.
At least 188,000 have been displaced in North Kivu since October 20, according to the United Nations. Clashes picked up again in North Kivu province on Friday, November 11, ending about a week of relative calm since the group launched their latest offensive in October. Battles have broken out around the villages of Kimbumba, Rugari and Tongo. Kimbumba is around 20 kilometers north of Goma, which the M23 briefly overran during the first big insurrection in 2012. The M23 have staged a major comeback in East Congo this year, since they were chased into neighboring Rwanda and Uganda in 2013. Tens of thousands have fled fresh fighting that has caused a diplomatic rift between Congo and Rwanda, which Congo accuses of backing the Tutsi-led group. However, Rwanda denies any involvement.
Let's get more on these issues. Security analyst Temitope Oludo joins us now for more on this. Thank you so much for joining us today on Network Africa.
Thank you so much for having me.
So what we're seeing playing out here in the Democratic Republic of Congo, renewed fighting between the army and the M23 rebels.
It's quite sad that after a relatively, peaceful atmosphere in 1 week, we've had this resurgence of attack, and this has been going on for about 10 years now. We all know the politics around it, so I'm not going to bore our viewers. But the bottom line is more of a accusation from both parties. Rwanda has actually been pointed out as the real culprit here that is sponsoring the M23 on the grounds that they feel that the Congolese government have allowed, some of the individuals involved in the, famous cleansing that took place some few years back, back through their borders into Congo. And this has been going on. We know even the Belgium government has got involved. So I'm quite pleased now that we'll see more of a regional, effort to try and resolve this issue. Even with the Kenyan government, Parliament, giving about $37 million, for the deployment of 1,000, Kenyan troops. And we know, just like your report has mentioned, that even Kenyatta have gone there. He's doing a great job after his exit as president in Kenya. He was involved, in the Ethiopia, crisis, which have now been more or less resolved with our own former president, President Olusegun Obasanjo. So we are seeing some of our former leaders now getting involved in resolution of some of the conflicts in Africa. And I think it's a good news that he's there over the weekend, to try and see how this issue could be resolved. And hopefully, fingers crossed, this issue will be resolved. But it needs more of a political resolution rather than a military resolution.
Earlier this year, the EAC agreed on a troop deployment deal to combat the rebels. The Kenyan contingent is on ground, and we still expect troops from Uganda and, of course, South Sudan. With this regional effort at play, how strong do you think this effort will be?
I think there's no doubt that there is a decision across the continent to try and make sure that this DRC saga, is brought to an end. And if it means arm twisting some of the political leaders, and we could see going into the countries to speak to those leaders, because those are the leaders that will face war crime, whether we like it or not. Because the United Nations has shown interest in this issue and released a statement about the atrocity. We know the Americans have also mentioned and pinpoint Rwanda, who we know have been is a good country now with a lot of development, and we think it's high time that they more or less divorce themselves from this ongoing crisis. And there is no other solution. The barrier of the gun, like Kenyatta said, is not the solution. Solution is a political roundtable conversation to try and address whatever is the issues here. And we know that Kenya invested a lot of money into this, which even the oppositions are against, shows the commitment of the regional bloc to deal with this issue once and for all.
Right, thank you for your thoughts on that. Security analyst Temitope Olodo speaking to us from Kent in the United Kingdom.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back to the program. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk has begun his first official visit to Sudan to assess the political and humanitarian situation in the country. This is Mr. Turk's first official country visit as UN Human Rights Chief. In Khartoum, he met with several government officials, adding that his visit is in solidarity with the people of Sudan at this very critical point in their history. During his visit, the High Commissioner is expected to meet First Lieutenant General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, Abdulrahman al-Burhan, President of the Transitional Sovereign Council. The High Commissioner will also travel to El Fasher in northern Darfur, where he will meet regional officials, representatives of internally displaced persons and other civil society organizations.
I have followed developments in Sudan over many, many years, and I have come here to be in solidarity with the people of Sudan at this very critical point in time in their history. And we can only hope that whatever we can do for the people of Sudan is to advance what the people yearn for, which is freedom, peace, justice. So I've met with civil society groups that have been involved in the political process. I've met with human rights defenders. who are at the front line of advancing the human rights of all people here in Sudan. I've also met, and that always is very hard, victims of and survivors of human rights violations, and of course also the de facto authorities and my UN colleagues. The purpose of the visit is to ensure that when it comes to this political process that is going on, but also when it comes to rebuilding a social fabric that gives hope for the future, that at the top of it is human rights.
Well, as some areas of Africa are grappling with extreme drought in South Sudan, the surface area of land permanently submerged underwater from incessant floods has tripled, exacerbating an already dire food security situation. However, the World Food Programme is tackling the situation by training farmers to diversify their farming practices.
In South Sudan's Lear County, Nyandeg Majok walks through what is left of her sorghum crops after they were submerged by floods. Though Majok built a dike around her home and crops, the flooding was too high. As well as destroying her crops, 30 of her goats were killed. South Sudan is one of the world's most rapidly warming countries and is suffering its 4th consecutive year of floods. Each year, more and more families are forced to eat wild food such as water lilies. The country's wetlands, known as the Sud, have expanded to 3 times their size since 2019, according to the World Food Programme. Footage from June shows a web barge navigating the swamps, creeks to deliver supplies. The WFP Deputy Country Director, Adeyinka Bajelo, said the Sud now covers 10 to 15% of South Sudan's land area.
More than 1 million people in South Sudan have been affected by extreme flooding. The surface area of land permanently submerged underwater has tripled, and an already dire food security situation exacerbated, leaving 2.9 million people at risk of starvation. Vulnerable communities here have done very little to contribute to climate change, living largely off of the land and without polluting technology. Now, it's vital that the international community comes together to support the South Sudanese to build resilience against increasingly severe climate shocks and a future free from the threat of famine.
While half the country is experiencing floods, the other half is suffering severe drought, contributing to high food insecurity. The World Food Programme has started a program to train farmers to diversify and grow drought-resistant crops such as rice, cassava and sukuma. The WFP program hopes that this project will mean more food for communities teetering at the brink of starvation.
Speaking of climate change, women and girls are essential, effective and powerful leaders to address the crisis, but they remain largely undervalued and underestimated. This is according to the UN Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed on Gender Day at the COP27 summit taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. However, she reiterates that there's a very simple and effective solution, and that's putting women and girls in the lead.
As food and water insecurity persist, women and girls are experiencing alarming levels of poverty and economic deprivation, increasing their vulnerability to gender-based violence. And UNDP projections indicate that about 90 million women in Africa could be food-starved by 2050. Women and girls are essential, effective and powerful leaders to address the climate crisis. But they remain largely undervalued and underestimated, with limited access to training, extension services, and the technology necessary for effective adaptation to the impacts of climate change. There is a very simple and effective solution: put women and girls in the lead. The transition to a green economy provides a unique opportunity to reduce environmental risks and ecological scarcities while strengthening women's resilience to climate change. Women can accelerate action towards gender equality for green, resilient and inclusive development. National green job strategies currently underway in several countries in the region must ensure women's active participation in decision-making forums and technical task forces. They must create institutional spaces for dialogue and policy solutions where women can bring their perspectives and expertise to designing gender-responsive economic policy, planning and budgeting.
Finally, FIFA has launched Football for Schools in Cote d'Ivoire, an initiative to teach sports educators proper soccer training techniques. The program aims to help develop professional-grade talent in a country where many already play the game on a daily basis.
Ivory Coast is the first country in West Africa and the fifth on the continent to join the Football for Schools F4S program, launched in 2019, with pilot projects in Puerto Rico and Lebanon. It incorporates soccer-related activities into school systems. Ivory Coast Youth Soccer Chairman Abdoulaye Dabate says it's essential because of a tendency for children to leave school to pursue football.
Parents see financial benefits of football. So for a child who is not so brilliant in school or who does not want to go, it becomes a good idea to encourage him on the path of football instead. But there is no assurance. The only assurance is to go to school.
UNESCO estimates show that about a third of students in sub-Saharan Africa drop out of school before they turn 15, and around 60% of them call it quits before they reach adulthood. Soccer does not have that problem. It is by far the region's most popular sport played everywhere, from schoolyards to street corners, by people of all ages. That's why Football for Schools organizers believe the sport is uniquely positioned to attract students to stay in school, while making professional-grade training available to anyone who wants to play.
This training we are doing is to explain to the coaches the methodology connected to soccer. Normally, you have teaching methods connected to football and others more connected to education. But here, we're a bit different because our method connects football and education at the same time.
The program doesn't just target students. Teachers and coaches also learn training techniques from the FIFA ambassadors.
This program can bring us something more because we work in high schools and middle schools, and some of us are coaches already. This is a very important tool to have.
Organizers anticipate that the program may one day reach up to 700 million children around the world, with the ultimate goal of nurturing talent for the game while encouraging children to stay in school.
That's Network Africa Today. Thank you for watching. I'm Joker Rogers.